My name is Vera Ashton. I'm 26 years old. And for most of my life, my own family treated me like a mistake they couldn't take back. My parents never hit me. They did something worse. They simply pretended I didn't matter. While my brother Dominic collected trophies, acceptance letters, and inheritance promises, I was handed silence, condescension, and a desk in the back corner of a company that bore my family name. But on the night Dominic stood in the grand ballroom of the St. Regis Hotel, surrounded by 400 people celebrating his ascension to everything, a quiet man in a dark suit slipped me an envelope, and everything my family had built their world on began to crack. Let me take you back to the beginning, because you need to understand what kind of people the Ashtons were before you understand what they lost. The Ashtons weren't just wealthy. They were the kind of wealthy that comes with its own mythology. My grandfather, Bernard Ashton, had built Ashton Commercial Group from a single leased office in South Boston in 1961. By 2024, the firm managed a portfolio of commercial properties worth over $100 million across the Northeast. His name was on 2 university buildings and a children's hospital wing. The kind of legacy that gets polished and displayed like silverware. My father, Clifford Ashton, inherited all of it, including the belief that inheritance was something you earn through performance. Degrees, titles, connections. The currency of approval in our house was achievement, and it was distributed very unevenly. I was born with a processing disorder, not diagnosed until I was 9, which meant I spent the first 3 years of school being called lazy, distracted, difficult. When the diagnosis finally came, my parents didn't respond with relief. They responded with embarrassment, as though my brain's wiring was a social liability they hadn't budgeted for. Dominic, 2 years older, was everything they'd imagined their child would be. Debate champion, summa cum laude at Princeton, law review at Columbia. Our dining room table was a museum of his accomplishments, framed certificates and photos arranged with curatorial precision. My name appeared nowhere on those walls. I remember a Thanksgiving dinner, I was 15, when my father gave a toast. He looked around the table and said he wanted to acknowledge the young man sitting across from him, the son who would one day carry the Ashton name into the next century. He said Dominic had already surpassed every expectation. Then his eyes drifted past me like I was furniture. Not even a footnote. My grandmother, Constance, was seated at the far end of that table. I watched her face when my father finished speaking. Her jaw tightened. Her eyes found mine. She gave the smallest, almost imperceptible shake of her head, as if to say, "Don't you dare believe a word of that." She was the only one who saw me, and I didn't know until much later just how carefully she'd been watching. After college, a state school that my father once referred to as a reasonable option given the circumstances, I applied to work at Ashton Commercial Group. I thought maybe if I was inside the company, if they could see me work, something would shift. My father agreed to bring me on. The title he gave me was office coordinator. Salary $44,000 a year. That same quarter, Dominic joined as director of acquisitions. His starting package was $260,000 plus quarterly bonuses. My days consisted of scheduling conference rooms, managing vendor contracts nobody else wanted to touch, and preparing presentation decks that senior staff would walk into meetings and claim as their own work. I was never introduced in client meetings. Never included in strategy sessions. Twice I submitted written suggestions about underperforming properties in our portfolio. Both times the email was acknowledged with a single word: thanks. But I kept watching. I kept learning. I developed a way of mapping deals visually, flow diagrams that showed me how money moved through the company, where the inefficiencies lived, which relationships were load-bearing and which were decorative. It was a skill born from necessity, from years of compensating for the way information didn't move through my brain the way it moved through other people's. I didn't see it as a talent then. I just thought of it as surviving. My grandmother had helped me build it. Every other Sunday, I would go to her apartment on Beacon Hill, where she kept boxes of original contracts and lease agreements from the company's earliest years. She would spread them across her dining room table and walk me through them, not as legal documents, but as stories. This one is about a landlord who trusted the wrong partner. This one is about a woman who knew the market was changing before everyone else did and moved first. You're not reading words, Vera. You're reading decisions. And decisions tell you everything about character. In the spring of 2020, when her health began to decline, she called me to her apartment for what I thought was a regular visit. She was thinner than I'd seen her, moving more carefully, but her eyes were the same, perfectly clear, perfectly sharp. She handed me something I didn't expect. A small lacquered box, dark wood, old brass clasp. Keep this, she said. Don't open it yet. You'll know when. I asked her what was inside. She smiled like I'd asked a very funny question. She changed the subject. We talked about her roses, about a biography she was reading, about whether the restaurant on Charles Street had gotten better or worse. She never mentioned the box again. 14 months later, she was gone. A stroke, quiet in her sleep. I was the only family member who visited her in the weeks before she died. My father sent flowers. Dominic sent a card through his assistant. I put the box in the back of my closet and tried to forget the strange weight of it. 3 years passed. Then, on an otherwise ordinary Tuesday afternoon in March of 2024, I received an email from Human Resources. Subject line, Organizational Restructuring, Confidential. It informed me that my position would be eliminated effective May 31st, and that I should expect a call regarding severance. I read it 4 times. The words kept rearranging themselves in that familiar way, like my brain was refusing to accept what they meant. That evening I stayed late, ostensibly to finish a report. What I was really doing was sitting very still in my cubicle, while the building emptied around me, and through the thin partition wall between my workspace and my father's office, I heard voices. My father, Clifford, and my mother, Sandra, who must have stopped by after her charity board meeting. My father's voice first. She can't still be here when Dominic takes the title. It looks wrong. People ask why she's not in leadership. Why she hasn't advanced. It raises questions I don't want to answer. My mother's voice, soft and careful the way she always was when she was agreeing with something she half knew was wrong. We've done everything we could. She just isn't built for this environment. Clifford again. So she goes. We'll be generous. 3 months severance. She'll find something else. Something more appropriate for her skill set. I pressed my palm flat against the cubicle wall. 3 months severance. I was living in a 1-bedroom in Cambridge with a roommate. No savings worth speaking of. My entire adult life had been organized around the hope that proximity to this company would eventually translate into belonging. That hope was evaporating in real time through a particle board wall. The event at the St. Regis was 2 days away. Dominic's formal investiture, my father's word, into the role of heir apparent to Ashton Commercial Group. 400 guests. A 12-course dinner. A string quartet that costs more than my monthly rent. I decided to go. I didn't know why, exactly. Maybe I needed to see it with my own eyes. Maybe some part of me was still waiting for something to happen, something I couldn't yet name. The night of the event, I wore a dress I'd bought secondhand the previous winter. Black, simple, perfectly fine. My mother intercepted me near the entrance, took one look at me, and said quietly, so only I could hear, "Table 31 is near the back." Near the back, she said like a warning. Don't make tonight harder than it needs to be, Vera. For any of us. I found my seat. Distant cousins I recognized vaguely from funerals. A colleague of my father's who introduced himself and immediately turned away. A pillar partially blocking my view of the stage. From table 31, through the gaps in the crowd, I watched my father take the microphone at 9 o'clock. The room went very quiet. He spoke about legacy. He spoke about what it meant to build something that outlasted you. He talked about the early days, about my grandfather, about the sleepless years and the risk and the sacrifice. The room listened with the attentiveness of people who had been well fed and were now ready to be moved. Then he said, "And so tonight, in front of everyone who matters to this family and to this company, I am announcing that Dominic Ashton will inherit my full estate upon my passing, including our home in Beacon Hill, the Nantucket property, and the position of Chief Executive Officer of Ashton Commercial Group." The room erupted. Standing ovation before he finished the sentence. Dominic walked to the stage in a bespoke suit that probably cost more than I made in a month. He was composed, handsome, practiced. He said things about gratitude and vision, and carrying the torch. The room roared again. At table 31, the cousin beside me leaned over and said, "So what does that mean for you?" I didn't answer. From the far side of the room, near the entrance, a man was watching me. Dark suit, silver hair, the posture of someone who had spent decades in rooms exactly like this one and felt absolutely nothing in them. He wasn't eating, wasn't drinking, just watching. When my father finished speaking, the man began walking toward me. He stopped at my table and said my name as a question. Vera Ashton. I said yes. He sat down without being invited, which somehow felt right. My name is Thomas Wren. I was your grandmother's attorney. He set a card on the table. Wren and Associates. He slid an envelope next to the card. Heavy paper, sealed with red wax, notarized stamp. She left this for you, with very specific instructions about when it should be delivered. I looked at the envelope. What kind of instructions? He looked toward the stage where Dominic and my father were still shaking hands with a line of well-wishers. She told me to deliver it on the night your father publicly designated Dominic as sole heir. She said, and I'm using her exact words, that by then you would be ready. I picked up the envelope. My hands weren't steady. He stood. I'll be available when you have questions. He nodded once and walked away through the crowd. I couldn't breathe in that ballroom. I found a side corridor near the kitchen, fluorescent lights, the distant sound of plates being stacked. I broke the wax seal. 3 pages. Dense type. Notarized. Dated September 4th, 2021. 6 months before she died. I read slowly, the way I always had to read, forcing each line into stillness. The document was a will. I, Constance Eleanor Ashton, being of sound mind, do hereby revoke all prior testamentary documents and declare this my last will and testament. My eyes moved down the page until they stopped. To my granddaughter, Vera Ashton, I bequeath 51% of my shares in Ashton Commercial Group LLC, currently valued at approximately $52 million, along with all associated voting rights. I read it again. Then again. This bequest is made in full recognition of my son Clifford's treatment of Vera. She has been systematically excluded, demeaned, and denied opportunity, not because she lacks capability, but because her capabilities were inconvenient to his narrative. Vera is not limited. Vera was failed. I will not allow his failures to define her inheritance. Something broke open in my chest. Not loudly, more like a seal giving way. I kept reading. To activate this bequest, Vera must formally request an emergency board meeting within 72 hours of receiving this document. Failure to act within this window will render this bequest null and void. 72 hours. The deadline would fall at 9 o'clock on Saturday evening. I stood in that corridor for a long time. The box in my closet, the lacquered wood and the brass clasp and the thing she'd said when she handed it to me. You'll know when. I knew. Thomas Wren was waiting near the coat check. He handed me a second card with a handwritten number on the back. Call me in the morning, he said. We have work to do. That night, back at my apartment while my roommate slept, I finally opened the box. A letter on my grandmother's personal stationery. A document dated 1962 with a notary stamp so faded it was barely visible. And a small silver USB drive that looked entirely out of place in the antique wood. The letter first. My darling Vera, if you're reading this, Thomas has done what I asked, and your father has done what I feared. I'm sorry I couldn't change him while I was alive. I tried for 60 years. Some things can't be changed from the inside, but they can be changed from above. The document is the original partnership agreement from when your grandfather and I co-founded the company. It establishes that founding shares carry permanent voting rights that cannot be diluted without full board approval. Clifford has never read it carefully. Men like your father rarely read things they assume they already understand. The USB contains something else. In 2019, your father proposed a motion at a closed board session to reclassify my shares as non-voting, citing, and I want you to read this carefully, cognitive decline consistent with advancing age. I was 79. I had just finished a 5-mile walk along the esplanade. The motion failed by 3 votes. I was one of them. But I recorded the session. And I kept the recording. Use everything wisely, Vera. Not for cruelty. For clarity. All my love, Grandma Constance. I plugged the USB into my laptop. The file opened. My father's voice filled the room, and I listened to him argue, calmly, methodically, that his own mother was no longer mentally fit to hold power over the company she had built. I closed the laptop. I sat in the dark for a long time. Then I made a list of everything I would need to do in the next 36 hours. At 8 the next morning, I called the number Thomas Wren had written on the card. He answered immediately. I was wondering how long you'd take. I need to call an emergency board meeting, I said. What do I need? 3 board member signatures on the petition. He was already moving, papers shuffling in the background. I anticipated this. I've been in contact with 2 directors who've had significant concerns about your father's management for some time. Eleanor Marsh and David Fung. Both of them knew your grandmother well. Both of them have been waiting for someone to go first. Will they sign? They already have. His voice was dry but not unkind. Your grandmother chose her timing carefully, Vera. She spent the last 2 years of her life laying groundwork you knew nothing about. Something about that undid me briefly. I pressed my hand against my mouth and waited until I could speak steadily again. What time is the meeting? Saturday morning. 10 a.m. Ashton Tower, 38th floor. I have 72 hours. Then let's not waste them. My father found out about the petition Friday afternoon. I know this because Dominic called me at 5:15, his voice wound tight as a wire. What did you do? I don't know what you're talking about. Dad just got a notice from the board secretary. Emergency session Saturday morning. Eleanor Marsh's name is on it. Eleanor Marsh hasn't initiated anything in this company in 8 years. What did you do, Vera? Maybe the board has concerns, I said. He laughed, short and sharp. You work in office administration. You schedule conference rooms. Don't play games you don't understand. I hung up. 20 minutes later, I heard my father's office door slam through the partition wall. Through it, his voice on the phone. It's a stunt. She's acting out because of the announcement. Eleanor must have lost her mind. Vera can barely manage a calendar. She's not a threat to anyone. I wrote that down. Somehow it seemed important to record the exact moment someone announced their own blindness. That night I prepared. Printed 3 copies of the will. Transferred the 2019 audio recording to my phone with 2 backups. Wrote a clean, factual 1-page summary of events. No acquiescence. No emotion. Just sequence. Thomas confirmed he would be present to authenticate. At 11:30, Eleanor Marsh texted me. Petition filed. See you in the morning. Your grandmother would be proud. I barely slept. But it was the kind of sleeplessness that comes from aliveness, not dread. Saturday morning. I arrived at Ashton Tower at 9:45 in a blazer I'd borrowed from my roommate, carrying a portfolio I'd bought at a thrift shop for $9. The elevator opened onto the 38th floor. Marble floors, floor-to-ceiling glass. A view of the harbor that costs more to maintain than most people's annual salaries. The security desk outside the boardroom. The guard checked his tablet twice and told me my name wasn't on the authorized list. Before he could finish the sentence, Dominic appeared behind me. He was in his best suit. He looked at me the way someone looks at a stray animal that has somehow gotten into the lobby of a luxury hotel. Vera, what exactly are you doing here? I have information to present to the board. He almost laughed. What kind of information? The kind I'd rather share in the boardroom. A voice from inside the room. Measured, unhurried. Carrying the quiet authority of someone who had survived 40 years in boardrooms precisely by not raising her voice. Let her in. Eleanor Marsh appeared in the doorway. 74 years old, silver hair cut bluntly, watching my brother with an expression that contained no warmth at all. She's here at my invitation. She has standing to address this board. Dominic turned to our father, who had appeared at the end of the corridor flanked by 2 senior executives. My father looked at me the way he always had, like he was calculating how quickly this could be resolved. Let her say her piece, he said finally, his voice smooth and dismissive. We'll see how long it takes. The boardroom. Oval table, 14 leather chairs, portraits of past leadership on the walls. My grandmother's portrait, I noticed immediately, hung above the fireplace at the far end. Oil on canvas, her eyes watchful, her expression exactly as I remembered it. I was directed to a seat at the far end of the table. Thomas Wren sat in the corner with his briefcase. He met my eyes once and nodded. The board chairman, Marcus Webb, a composed man in his late 60s who had served on this board since my grandfather's era, called the session to order. Eleanor Marsh, you requested this session. You have the floor. Eleanor stood. She was brief. She said a document had come to light that materially affected the ownership structure of the company, and that the board had an obligation to review it. Then she yielded her time to me. I stood. 14 people looked at me. My father leaned back in his chair. Dominic sat to his right, watching with a careful expression that I recognized as the face he wore when he was uncertain, but didn't want anyone to know. I want to thank the board for allowing me to address you today. What I'm about to share may surprise some of you. I ask only that you allow the evidence to speak before drawing any conclusions. My father raised his hand. He stood slowly, buttoning his jacket. The gesture of a man who had learned to use physical stillness as a form of authority. Marcus, before we invest more time in this, I want to provide some context. He paused. Vera is my daughter. I love her. But she holds an administrative position in this company. She has no legal training, no financial background. I think we all understand what's actually happening here. Dominic chimed in, his voice carrying that practiced blend of sympathy and condescension. Vera also has a processing disorder. We've always tried to be supportive, but there are real limitations that. Marcus Webb's voice cut across the room like a door closing. Mr. Ashton, your daughter requested time. She'll have it. You can respond when she's finished. My father sat. I looked at both of them, my father and my brother, and felt something that wasn't anger. It was colder than anger, and clearer. They weren't protecting the company. They weren't even protecting themselves, not really. They were protecting a story. The story where I was nothing. The story they'd been telling for 26 years. And the story was about to end. I placed the will on the table. This is the last will and testament of Constance Eleanor Ashton, founder of this company. Notarized September 4th, 2021. My father's face changed. The color left it fast, like water leaving a glass. That's not possible. His voice had lost its boardroom texture. That's not possible. Her will was settled. We executed it after she passed. You executed her 2017 will, I said. Under New York state law, a valid subsequent will automatically supersedes all prior testamentary documents. This will was executed 4 years later. I slid the document to Marcus Webb. Thomas, I said, would you please confirm this document's authenticity for the record? Thomas stood from his corner chair and walked to the table. The room watched him the way rooms watch someone who is about to say something that cannot be unsaid. I'm Thomas Wren, senior partner at Wren & Associates. I served as Constance Ashton's personal attorney from 2009 until her death. I can confirm this will was executed in my presence on September 4th, 2021. It was witnessed by 2 independent notaries. The original is held in escrow at Beacon Private Trust and has been registered with the Probate Court of Suffolk County. Marcus Webb put on his glasses and read. He was quiet for a long moment. This document bequeaths 51% of Ashton Commercial Group shares to Vera Ashton. Low sounds moved around the table. Not quite a gasp. More like the room exhaling. It's a forgery. Dominic's voice. But the confidence had leaked out of it. Thomas didn't even look at him. I'd strongly advise against making allegations of fraud without evidence, Mr. Ashton. Wren & Associates has a 40-year reputation in this city. My father rose from his chair again. My mother would never. She was ill in her final months. She was vulnerable. Someone clearly took advantage. I reached for my phone. I pressed play. The audio filled the boardroom. My father's voice from 5 years earlier, in this same building, in a closed session that he had assumed was private. Constance no longer has the cognitive capacity to exercise sound judgment over this company. I'm proposing we reclassify her shares as non-voting, effective immediately. I stopped the recording. The silence after it was absolute. That was a private session. My father's voice had become something I'd never heard before. Searching. Your mother recorded it as a shareholder, which was her right, I said. She recorded it the same week she came home and revised her will. I looked directly at my father for the first time since I'd walked into the room. She wasn't diminished when she wrote this will. She was protecting herself from her own son. And she was protecting me. Marcus Webb removed his glasses. He set them on the table with the careful deliberateness of a man arranging his thoughts. He looked at Thomas. He looked at the document. He looked at me. Is there any legal challenge to the validity of this will that the board should be aware of? Thomas answered without hesitation. None that would survive scrutiny. Marcus looked around the table. Does anyone have documentation contradicting what's been presented today? Silence. Long, uncomfortable, complete. He picked up his pen. I think we need to recess and have our counsel review these documents. The recess lasted 50 minutes. I sat at the far end of the table and didn't move. Thomas brought me a glass of water. Eleanor Marsh walked past me and put one hand briefly on my shoulder without saying anything. My father and Dominic sat in the corner. Their conversation began in fierce whispers and devolved, toward the end, into something that looked less like strategy and more like accusation. The board's attorney, a careful man named Howard Sills, returned first. He whispered to Marcus, then to the other directors. Then Marcus called everyone back to their seats. Our counsel has reviewed the documentation. Sills looked up from his notes. The will is valid under Massachusetts and New York state law. The 2017 testament is superseded. Effective today, Vera Ashton holds 51% of Ashton Commercial Group and all associated voting rights. As majority shareholder, she may bring motions before this board. He looked at me. Miss Ashton, do you have any motions you wish to present? I stood for the second time that morning. My father rose immediately. Marcus. Sit down, Clifford. Marcus's voice was quiet and final. Miss Ashton has the floor. My father sat. Something shifted in his face that I had never seen there before. For 26 years he had looked at me with dismissal, impatience, embarrassment. What I saw now was different. It was the expression of a man who suddenly understands that the terrain has changed beneath his feet, and he has no map. I looked around the table at 14 people who had spent years treating my father as the fulcrum of this company, as the person whose approval organized everything else. I'm not moving to remove Clifford Ashton as CEO. The surprise in the room was audible. Dominic's head came up. Eleanor Marsh tilted hers. Even Thomas allowed himself a slight expression of mild interest. What I'm proposing, I continued, is a formal vote of confidence. The board will determine whether they wish to continue under his leadership. If the majority votes confidence, he retains his position, and I will not interfere with day-to-day operations. If the majority votes no confidence, he will step down per our bylaws. Dominic was on his feet. This is theater. You're humiliating our father in front of. This is corporate governance, I said. It's in the bylaws your grandfather wrote in 1963. The same bylaws your father has cited when it suited him. If the board believes in his leadership, he has nothing to worry about. Marcus looked at both of us. Then at the room. All those expressing confidence in Clifford Ashton as CEO, please raise your hands. 5 hands. His longest tenured allies. His appointments. All those expressing no confidence. 8 hands. Then a 9th after a pause. Marcus counted. He set his pen down. He looked at my father with an expression that wasn't unkind. Clifford. The motion carries. Per Section 12 of our bylaws, you have 30 days to tender your resignation. My father didn't speak. He didn't look at Marcus or at the board or at Dominic. He looked at me. Not with rage. Not with the contempt I'd brace for. He looked at me the way someone looks at a thing they held in their hands for years without ever understanding what it was. Then he walked out. I want to stop here for one moment and say something. Because I know some of you are asking why I didn't simply remove him. Why I gave him a vote he could have won. Because my grandmother's letter said, use this for clarity, not cruelty. Because I'd spent 26 years watching what power did to someone who wielded it without restraint. Because the goal was never to destroy my father. The goal was to stop being destroyed by him. If that makes sense to you, keep reading. Because we're not finished. My father caught me in the private corridor outside the boardroom. My mother was with him. She must have been waiting. Her eyes were red, mascara tracking down both cheeks, her hands clasped in front of her like she was bracing for weather. My father's voice was stripped of its boardroom polish. "You have no idea what you've done." "I know exactly what I've done," I said. "I made it stop. We were protecting you." His voice cracked on the word. "You think this is easy, watching you struggle? Watching you fall behind? We were trying to shield you." "You shielded Dominic," I said. "You erased me." My mother reached toward me. "Vera." Every family event where my accomplishments were invisible. Every meeting I wasn't invited to. Every conversation where Dad talked about what Dominic would inherit and looked right through me. That wasn't protection. I kept my voice even. That was a choice. "You chose it every day." My mother's face crumpled. "Vera, please. I'm not here to punish you," I said. "But I'm not going to pretend the past 26 years were something other than what they were. I'm going to go home now. And then I'm going to figure out what comes next." My father's hand closed briefly on my arm. "This isn't over. We'll contest the will." "We'll." "You'll lose," I said. "And somewhere, some part of you already knows that. Because she knew you. She planned for you." I took my arm back. I walked to the elevator. Behind me, my mother said my name once more. I kept walking. The elevator doors closed. I leaned against the wall and let myself breathe. The adrenaline was dropping, and what was underneath it wasn't triumph. It was grief. Clean and enormous. The grief of finally letting go of something you've been carrying so long you forgot it was heavy. The hope that they would change. The belief that patience and proximity would eventually be enough. That one day they would look at me and see me. That hope was over. I had ended it myself. By the time the elevator reached the lobby, I had wiped my eyes. Thomas Wren was waiting by the door. He fell into step beside me. "Your grandmother told me she spent 3 years preparing for this morning," he said. "Meetings I never knew about. Documents she arranged and rearranged. She wanted to be certain it would hold. Why didn't she just tell me?" He was quiet for a moment. "She said you weren't ready to carry the weight of it while she was still alive. She said you needed to reach the moment on your own terms, or you'd spend the rest of your life wondering if you'd really earned it." I thought about that for a long time. My father signed his resignation letter 11 days later. I wasn't in the building. I heard about it through an email from Marcus Webb, who also offered me a formal role, strategic advisor to the board, with a seat at the table for all major decisions. I accepted. 3 weeks after that, the restructuring became semi-public. The Boston Business Journal ran a piece with the headline "Ashton Commercial Group Leadership Transition Amid Internal Changes." It was carefully worded. It named no one directly. But in the circles where the Ashton name carried weight, everyone understood what had happened. My father and mother canceled 3 consecutive social engagements. Dominic went quiet on every professional platform for weeks. The architecture of the life they had built on the assumption of my permanent invisibility was being quietly renovated. I didn't celebrate this. But I didn't mourn it either. What I did was work. I spent the first month reading every significant contract and lease in the Ashton portfolio, slowly, carefully, in my own way, with diagrams and flow maps and the visual shorthand I'd been developing for years. I found 3 underperforming properties that were mismanaged not because the market was bad, but because the relationships governing them had never been properly mapped. I wrote a 12-page report. Marcus Webb read it twice and asked me to present it to the full board. It was the first time I had ever been asked to present anything to anyone. At Thanksgiving, my mother called. She asked if we could have coffee. Just the 2 of us. I said yes. She arrived before me. Smaller somehow. Or maybe I was just seeing her differently. She held her cup with both hands and looked at me with an expression I couldn't entirely read. "I don't know how to start," she said. "You could start with the truth." She was quiet for a moment. "I convinced myself for years that we were protecting you. That our way of managing she paused, your differences was practical, was kind." She looked down at the table. "I think I knew the whole time. I think the reason I worked so hard to believe otherwise is that the truth was unbearable. I let that sit there between us. I can't undo it," she said finally. "I can only tell you that when I look back at it now, I'm ashamed. Of myself most of all." We sat in that coffee shop for 2 hours. It wasn't a reconciliation. It was something more careful than that. A first conversation between two people who had lived in the same house for 20 years without ever really speaking. When I left, I didn't feel healed. But I felt something that had been sealed for a very long time beginning, slowly, to open. In February, Dominic texted me. He asked if we could talk. I waited 3 days to respond. Then I said yes. We met on the esplanade. A cold Saturday, the harbor steel gray beside us. He looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. I've been in therapy since June, he said. Which is probably 12 years overdue. I didn't respond to that. The golden child thing, he said. It sounds like a gift from the outside. But what it actually is a performance you can never stop giving. He looked at the water. I spent 30 years being what they needed me to be. And I had no idea what I actually was. I know that's not the same as what you went through. No, I said. It's not. But it's something. He looked at me. I spent my whole career standing in rooms where you should have been standing. I didn't put you there. But I didn't try to change it either. He stopped. I don't know if sorry covers it. It doesn't, I said. But it's a start. We walked the rest of the path in silence. Two people who had grown up strangers in the same family, learning for the first time what it might mean to be related. By spring, I had moved into my own apartment in Charlestown. Top floor, exposed brick, a window that faced the harbor. The same harbor my grandmother had walked beside on her way to her first office in 1961. I hung her portrait above my desk. Not the formal oil painting from the boardroom. A photograph I'd found in the lacquered box, tucked beneath the letter. She was 32 years old in it, standing in front of a building on Atlantic Avenue with a set of keys in her hand, squinting into the sun, looking like she owned the entire city and was about to prove it. She had seen me long before I could see myself. That's the thing about being overlooked that nobody tells you. It takes so long to believe your own version of yourself when everyone around you has been insisting on a different one. The story they tell about you becomes the walls of the room you live in. You start to mistake the room for reality. My grandmother gave me a key, but I had to be the one to use it. I think about the processing disorder now differently than I used to. The way information doesn't move through me in straight lines. The way I see systems instead of sequences, patterns instead of pages. The way I build maps in my mind of things that other people describe in words. I spent years treating this as a deficit to apologize for. It's not a deficit. It's a different architecture. My father read contracts looking for leverage. My grandmother read them looking for structure. I read them looking for the human decisions buried inside them. The moments where someone trusted or didn't, moved or waited, saw clearly or looked away. That's not a limitation. That's the whole job. If you've listened this far, I don't need to tell you what this story is about. You already know. You know because you've felt some version of it yourself. The moment someone you love looks through you. The moment you start to wonder whether their version of you might be true. The years of carrying their verdict around like it's documentation. It isn't documentation. It's just their fear, dressed up in your name. You don't need a secret will. You don't need a boardroom or a majority shareholder vote. What you need is simpler and harder than all of that. You need to stop waiting for the people who failed to see you to finally see you. They may never. And your life cannot wait for their permission. My grandmother spent 60 years building something from nothing. She did it in an era when every door she needed was being held shut from the inside. She kept building anyway. And at the end, with the time she had left, she used everything she'd built to make sure that the one person in her family who reminded her of herself would have the chance to do the same. She gave me the tools. I just had to decide I was worth using them. And if you're sitting somewhere right now wondering whether you're worth it, whether the quiet that's been imposed on you means what they say it means, I want you to hear this. It doesn't. The silence was never about your value. It was about their limits. And you were never limited. You were just waiting for the right moment to prove it.